Did you miss me? This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
They are changing this other stuff so much, and they're trying to keep the narrative going that we're not changing the system, so everything's going to work together.
So, no, to me, the classes are fundamental systems of 5e. It's the subclasses that are content.
Probably should stop pretending that this is necessarily backwards compatible.
Your new D&D will run Curse of Strahd without crashing.
How is this hobby going to grow?
We don't design our system against assholes.
Well, then I don't care about this person. Why are they listening to our podcast?
Mission accomplished, because it made this guy mad.
I'm going to make an innuendo check. I wonder how many people said that.
They're doing this on purpose to tire us out so that we'll stop struggling. Warlock is a full-on half-caster now, but I will say they're like a half-caster who doesn't have half anything else.
All that and more right now.
3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG and D&D podcast that is not in playtest. That's right, this is the 83rd edition of the Eldritch Lorecast, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head. 83. And I thought it would be fun this morning. My name's Ben Byrne, by the way. I'm joined, as always, by James Hake, Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, the original band back together. And I hope that you folks didn't read through this bit of the playtest specifically, because I have a fun game that I want to play, which is to first ask James Hake, all right, Flaming Sphere in the new playtest is in the Evocation School. What spell school is it from originally in the 2014?
Conjuration.
Correct. All right, that's a point to James.
Ooh.
All right, Dael Kingsmill. Your spell, sending.
No,
sending,
don't ask me
25
spells.
word, send it a message. It is now divination. What spell school was it from in 2014?
I don't even know the spell schools, Ben. I can think of 3 of them.
You take a guess. That's a 30% chance of probably being wrong because there's more percentages outside of that.
Necromancy. That's
Is that
my
a guess?
answer.
Is that a guess?
Necromancy.
Okay, does anybody want to take the steal? Sending, what was it from?
Also conjuration.
Incorrect. It was Shawn. Have you got any ideas? No, I thought this one was really obvious. Evocation. Come on.
Of course.
You evoke the words into somebody else's head.
Of course.
All right, Shawn Merwin. No points on that round. Shawn Merwin, your spell is Dancing Lights. Now it is from Illusion in the 1D&D playtest. What was it previously?
I was going to say illusion, so let me go with transmutation.
Incorrect. Does anybody want to take the steal?
Is this one conjuration?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
No, it is
Evocation?
not.
What was
Correct.
happening in 2014?
Correct. James Hake, Dancing Lights was evocation. You evoke the lights that dance, I suppose. All right, this one I thought this one was pretty made sense to me. I'll throw this one up in the air. I think James is on 2 points so far. Stone Skin. It is now transmutation. What was the spell school for Stone Skin previously?
What could it possibly have been previously, if not transmutation? What?
That's how I have felt about every single one of these questions, James.
Is alteration even a school anymore?
That's
No.
Skyrim.
You're mixing it up with Skyrim, yeah.
Okay. No, I'm not. because I don't play Skyrim.
Abjuration?
Correct. That is another point.
Okay.
I guess that would make
James Hay.
sense.
I'm glad this is going so well. I thought these were all going to be really obvious. All right, telepathy. Telepathy. It is now from divination.
What was it before? What were they doing?
Yeah, they didn't make much sense previously.
What
Enchantment.
did you say? Oh.
No, it is not enchantment.
Illusion?
It is not illusion.
Evocation. Everything's been evocation.
Dale gets a point.
Yeah.
Everything's
Why is
from
it
evocation. There we go.
Just like sending, you're evoking words into their brain.
All right. Second last, blindness, deafness. Blindness / deafness was transmutation. Is transmutation. was previously
Enchantment.
no.
Is enchantment even a school?
Necromancy?
Dael gets a second point.
was it?
Enchantment is a school.
It was necromancy. You and I both
It was
get that point.
necromancy. All right, and then the final one, glibness. Glibness, the most accurately named spell, because you're being glib. It is now enchantment. There you go, Shawn. Enchantment.
There is one.
Shows its face. What was it previously?
What could it be if not enchantment?
Illusion?
No.
Evocation.
No. The
Alteration.
always go rock. Restoration. Destruction. No, I'm going to have to call that one. It is transmutation previously. You transmuted yourself into being sarcastic, I suppose.
Nonsense. I've got a fun one for you.
Okay,
This digs us back into the D&D Next playtest era. This is my favorite spell school change. And Ben, would you check for me what spell school is Cure Wounds? In 2014, it's Evocation, right? It's still
Yes.
Evocation now. It was a different school in D&D Next. Can you guess what it was?
Necromancy?
Yes.
Oh, was it?
Necromancy.
It should be necromancy. Cowards.
No, I disagree so much.
Nah,
I just-
absolutely should be.
I just did a video on this, and I really dislike the idea
We're
of
going to go
necromancy.
back to the old school YouTube days, make a YouTube reply, response, whatever they were called. Response video.
Yeah, we'll start YouTube beef. It'll be great. Anyway, speaking of not thinking about things, Wizards of the Coast have put out another playtest packet for D&D, which you can tell from the 50-minute video, which we all watched, every minute
Definitely
of.
watched it.
Of J. Craw laying out the changes. Do we want to start with martials and weapons? Does that seem
I
like...
want to start somewhere, Ben.
Okay, please,
great.
Shawn. All right.
I want to start with two quotes, not from the 50-minute video, but from the smaller video that Jeremy did, where he gave us a couple of quotes that I want to get your reaction to. I want to get this esteemed and knowledgeable crew's reaction to.
Oh, I know exactly what this is going to be about.
Quote 1. An adventurer is not aware how a class functions on the inside.
Okay.
Thoughts?
Okay.
I think, at the risk of evoking Shawn's rage. Wait, sorry, hit me with the quote one more time. I want to make sure I get the nuance of this.
An adventurer is not aware how a class functions on the inside. What he was talking about is all the changes that they're making don't matter on the class side of things because the adventures have been written in a way that they don't care or know what the classes are. They sit on their own, these adventures.
I think I agree to a small capacity, which is that the adventure doesn't necessarily know the class makeup of the party. And therefore, like a magic item in a room might not be usable to anybody because nobody is an appropriate class to really be able to make use of that magic item. But I think with the power climb that we are seeing in the new classes, it means that older adventures might need a bit of tampering to be able to ensure that they remain a challenge to the players.
Well, the maxim I'd always heard as a sort of starting game master was make sure that you tailor your adventures to your party so that everyone can, at some point in the adventure, have a moment that feels like they get to do something that's uniquely theirs. And that's something I try to do whenever I run an adventure. And so it's always felt to me like the adventures that they sell off the shelf are not designed that way because how could they be? And so there's always an element of take this and fiddle with it to make sure that it fits your party. But it really depends on how deep the changes are going to be, right? Because there are certain benchmarks. Once you can fly, certain challenges are no longer an issue, et cetera, et cetera. So, Yeah, and not wholly untrue, I think, but not wholly true either.
Yeah, I'm in a similar camp. I don't know about it from the angle of like officially published adventures, but I mean, if I'm plotting an adventure out, even if I'm not trying to cater it specifically to a given party, there is a degree to which I'm going, is there something here that's fun for rogues to do? What kind of stuff can rogues do? Keeping in mind, okay, well, what if there was a paladin? How much extra health would this monster need to be able to, whatever. So I think I am keeping in mind the internal mechanics of classes when I'm writing my own adventures.
Excellent. Thank you for those reasoned responses. I appreciate it. Second quote, classes are content. They are not system.
Oh, now I have feelings. I think I disagree with that. I think that classes are systems shaped to resemble content. I think that classes are, broadly speaking, like what we're doing is we're taking an archetype, a broad archetype, and we're building a system that can let you play that thing, right? It's all it is telling you what dice to roll when. That's what a class is when you get down to the sort of base level of the mechanics of how a class works. If you didn't do that, it would be a narrative game.
This statement is baffling to me because it is the way that I would think in 3rd edition, where there were about 8 gajillion classes that you could play, broadly, mix and match, all over the place. But now in 5e, where there's 13 classes and 13 classes only, the Core 12 and Artificer, and there's all these
and the Blood Hunter. It's on D&D Beyond. It counts.
No, it doesn't.
A dagger in the back of Matt Mercer's back, James Hake. A dagger in his back.
It's a great class, but as far as Jeremy Crawford's concerned, no, it doesn't.
Fair definitions.
So, no, to me, the classes are fundamental systems of 5e. It's the subclasses that are content.
Even then, I think it's closer to being a system. So for example, in my head, adventure books are content, right? Because that's guiding you through a story. It's not really introducing new mechanics or systems in place. You have a pre-existing bunch of systems in order to run that. I think they're like subsystems once you add in subclasses, which is not a very helpful phrase for this conversation. But it's the content is like the name of the ability. The little blurb, the little description of what they imagine it to represent, that's the content. But the minute that you're saying, if you roll a critical hit, then you also, roll an additional die of the weapon's damage, that's system right there. That is system. I don't know how you could call it anything else.
I could see you could call it anything else. I might be playing devil's advocate with myself a little bit here, but critical hits are a system. Damage is a system. Those bits of content are engaging with existing systems, but they aren't the systems themselves. I can see why Jeremy might say that.
Yeah, I can kind of...
Okay, I can see why Jeremy might say that because it's very important to protect what is content for the company in this post-OG El Debacle world.
It's also convenient for him to say that because they are changing this other stuff so much and they're trying to keep the narrative going that we're not changing the system, so everything's going to work together. We're just changing the content without admitting that even if a class is not a system, it has to fit into this machine that is the system perfectly. If one gear is out of place, the whole system breaks down because you are adding this content, subsystem, mini system, whatever you want to call it, to the main system. And I read the quote out of context before I walked into my class.
I think I saw the tweet.
And so I put on the board for my class, and we're going through D&D now. This quote just came out from Wizards of the Coast. What do you think? And we could have talked all period about this. And then I went back and heard the quote in context, and it was exactly as I expected. Jeremy is trying to say this is the system and the classes are completely different things, and therefore we're all good with changing it because the system's going to remain intact. And as we all did, I had opinions, and I wanted to hear others.
Here's a quick question, because Ian's just pointed out in the chat, when World of Warcraft added the Death Knights, was that a new system or new content? Is that definition changed in a video game context as opposed to a role-playing game context?
Well, it's complicated in a video game context, right? Because of the system underlying how those mechanics play out, right? And so much of that system and how it functions is hidden behind the layer that we as players get to see. That's the tricky thing with a video game versus something like a tabletop RPG, where we have to manually enact the system versus a video game that does it for you, so you don't have to see it.
I think it was Gethin who said on Twitter just before we were recording, I saw saying that now that weapon mastery specifically has been baked into the class features for the fighter and the barbarian, and presumably some others may get access to it. I can see a rogue kind of having the ability maybe in a future playtest to be able to access or a monk that we haven't seen yet. We probably should stop pretending that this is necessarily backwards compatible. Technically it is, but what incentive do you have to play a 2014 fighter or champion when you can play the 2024 version and, you get different uses of, name of the ability is completely escaping me, Second Wind, and you get access to the weapon mastery. And now
it's also worth noting that in terms of backwards compatibility as well, you can't exactly play the new fighter with, for example, the old weapons list. Sure. It's not entirely, mix and match, choose what you want. If you're playing with a fighter or something that accesses the weapon mastery features, then you have to use the new weapons list.
Yeah, because
hold on, I'm going to argue with this a little bit, because I think it's entirely possible, but it's not the kind of people who are like us. It's people who don't care. It's people who are playing D&D and they don't know and they don't care about all of this nonsense. They have an old player's handbook from the 2014 era, and a friend invites them to go over and play D&D. And they're like, cool, I'll bring my 3rd level fighter. And the friend is like, yeah. And then maybe there's a bit of confusion at the table, but he's like, I don't want to learn all that new stuff. Can I just play this guy? And the friend is like, yeah, whatever. And
I think the problem will be more with the 7th level fighter, whose entire new ability comes down to being able to swap out the weapon mastery abilities of weapons.
But this person doesn't care about that. He's not playing that fighter. He's playing the old fighter.
Well, then I don't care about this person. Why are they listening to our podcast?
Well, that's not the point. The point is that there's a ton of people out there who don't listen to D&D podcasts, but who play D&D anyway.
Well, I'm not talking
this
to
is
them,
all
James.
lost on them.
I'm on a D&D podcast. Talk to the hand.
I get what you're saying, James. I totally get that, because I have friends in my own group who really enjoy rolling dice and really enjoy playing the game. And I've thought about Dante was describing Pathfinder to me the other day. He's in a Pathfinder campaign, 2nd edition, and every so often, I'll be like, oh, how'd the game go last night or whatever? And he explains some new system to me. He's like, oh, well, this functions like this or that functions like that. And I'm like, okay, I can definitely see the DNA there about how that's quite similar to 5e, and how these two different systems could have shared an ancestor with action, bonus action, movement versus 3 actions, and you kind of can do whatever you want with them within the list of available actions, whatever. But I have a group, even though the changes are quite subtle, I have players in my group that will not want to swap to a different system, even if it is very similar, for the simple reason that they just want to roll the dice. They don't know what half of their abilities do unless it's something that they use pretty regularly, And so I can totally see those people, whether they're in an individual group or whether it's a whole group, that are just like, we've got this version, let's just use this version. Or because the like you said, with the 7th level ability is around the expertise. If there's no other fighter weapon expertise, if there's no other fighter in the group, that one person playing the fighter might not notice at all.
Well, I think that at that point of a person not caring, that's the point where we can say that a class is content, not system, because that person isn't playing any class anyway. They're literally just rolling their d20 to hit and then rolling their damage.
Well, that's why I get the spirit of what Jeremy Crawford said, even if I don't necessarily agree with him strictly speaking. because when you start to pull at the thread of the system, I mean, 5e is a system that's so loose, you can pull at the thread anyway, and it kind of stays up. It's like a house of cards that refuses to fall down. But the the system, if I was to infer what he meant, is rolling the d20, adding a number to it, and deciding if that is higher or lower than a DC. And that's like the fundamental core of what 5e is. And then you might roll damage dice or some special dice for a bespoke effect. Which, technically speaking, if you took the new classes and you played Curse of Strahd as it exists now with it, it will ask for the same things. It will ask for a persuasion check. It will ask for an athletics check, you know.
Backwards compatible means that your new Xbox will run the previous Xbox's version of Halo without crashing. It means that your new D&D will run Curse of Strahd without crashing.
Sure, absolutely. It might not be the ideal way to run it, but it's technically possible.
Just to be clear that in the gaming community, we all hated it whenever they said backwards compatible and just meant Halo.
I am in a confusing situation right now because I have a PS5 and there are old games I want to play, and I'm like, wait, is that available?
Work?
Yeah, exactly. What works? What's even available? You know,
and then every now and then there'll be a game like, I don't know, Ultimate Spider-Man, when I switched Xbox to the next upgrade, would play for like 30 minutes at a time and then crash. You never know.
That's a shame because Ultimate Spider-Man was a damn good Spider-Man game.
Good game.
There's your swear word
game.
for the week. That was
We're
that made
Australian.
you feel like
Damn
Spider-Man.
doesn't count as a swear word.
Yeah. YouTube.
How is this hobby going to grow? It's going to grow by people being able to pick up the game and DM it for their friends, for their family, for people who want to play. What's the easiest way to get people to DM? By presenting them with a game that is coherent, that's playable, that's easy to teach, and that's fun. The more incoherent you make the rules, whether they're self-contained or whether it's because there are several versions that different people are going to bring to the table, it becomes harder and harder to convince a DM to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally agree that somebody who brings their 2014 Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, who doesn't care, can just sit down and play. But that is going to be a strain on the game masters who are going to have to figure all of this out and be the air traffic controller to try to say, well, yes, okay, you can play that and you can play that. But once you see how much more powerful that fighter is than your fighter, are you going to be upset? Are we going to have trouble at the table? If not, great. But there will be hard feelings for some players who can't do those tricky things and knock people prone every round like this person over there is doing. And it's problematic. And I just want Wizards to be totally aware of these things as they design, because the designers might not be thinking how the people are going to have to market it, who may not be thinking about how people are going to be selling it, who might not be thinking about how the social media coordinators are going to have to deal with questions. And everyone needs to work together as a team and be on the same page, moving in the same direction. And I pray that that's going to happen. And as we talk about these other things, it's going to be of utmost importance that even just the design team understands the breadth and the depth of the changes that they're making and what it's going to mean for game masters in a year and in 10 years as other content comes out and as these little nuances that we think are cool get lost and wording in future books changes just enough that now we've got power gamers and rules lawyers going, but this says it's only an attack, not a weapon attack. And so therefore I can do this. And that's where we lose players. And that's why we need new editions sometimes to reset everything and get everybody back in the same page. And I worry that the polishing, as opposed to the re-engineering, is going to lead further down the power creep path as opposed to giving us a restart that some people think we need.
Early on in 5th edition, must have been 2015 or 2016, one of the core designers at Wizards said, and I might be paraphrasing, but I don't think I am, we don't design our system against assholes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say, we don't cover for every edge case because some jerk is going to willfully misinterpret the intention
As
of the
Jane
game.
Austen once said, I do not write for dull elves.
And there was a very interesting statement because Jeremy Crawford did not say it, right? Jeremy Crawford is a very letter of the law kind of guy, and that reveals some internal, I don't know, differences of philosophy within the design team. But I have to wonder, is that the philosophy that's playing out right here? Is that a philosophy that's worth following? Or should a game be litigious in its application of the rules? Because otherwise you have no institutional defense against jerks.
The thing there, though, is they may not be designing for assholes, but game masters have to deal with them at the table. And if Wizards doesn't give DMs the ammunition and the help, then that's where we get, went to the game store to play D&D, and it was just two people arguing the whole time, and D&D is ridiculous, and I'm never playing again. And that's the kind of thing that Wizards of the Coast, can they police everything? Absolutely not. Should they police everybody and everything? Absolutely not. But they can create products that help game masters deal with issues.
Also, I mean, 5e is not a war game, but having played within that space, there's definitely the reputation that some folks have in the war game community of like willfully misinterpreting rules and, you know, trying to get some edge advantage by very specifically interpreting words. But at the same time, you need common language. Sometimes disagreements happen at the table between two very reasonable people who genuinely read the rule differently because of the placement of a certain word or whatever it happens to be. And sometimes that is important. You know, I had to read the barbarian's abilities in this new playtest a few times to double check what specified a melee weapon and what didn't specify a melee weapon, what just said a weapon attack or whatever the wording is, to ensure that I understood when rage damage takes effect and when it doesn't. And that's important to be able to agree on those fundamental things. I think that Wizards, you know, we've been saying this at the risk of sounding like a broken record. We said this last year where they're caught between a rock and a hard place, the rock of 5e's intense popularity and the hard place of needing a refresh before the game stagnates, without accidentally culling, you know, half their audience, especially the casual audience of 5e. And they've definitely gone for the Nintendo-like solution of like the new Super Mario Brothers or the new 3DS.
It's the new 3DS. Yeah.
Let me tell you, the number of headaches, especially because at EB Games we sold pre-owned products, the number of times I had to explain it's a pre-owned new 3DS rather than a brand new out-of-the-box new 3DS.
Oof. Yeah, no, I particularly I feel like early on in all of this, back in the day when the one D&D playtest was still fresh and I still felt my heartbeat, I feel like I was closer to team 5e is still going strong. I don't think we're on the decline yet. Why are we doing this? Now I'm at the other end where I'm like, well, if you're doing this, just let the designers run free. Just let them actually design. I'm reading this document and I'm like, imagine if I cannot fathom that this is really, really starting to feel like a vanity project, but I don't think it's a vanity project on behalf of the designers necessarily. I would love to see what they would do if they were building the Warlock again from scratch. You know what I mean? Compared to this. And I can't help but now conceptualize them being really held back from what they actually want to do.
To be fair, while I don't disagree with you, I actually kind of like the fact that this is a 5e refresh. I just wish that it was maybe marketed a little bit better and they had either kept the 1D&D moniker or they had treated it like 5.5 and really like delineated an actual break between the two and said like, look, this is a new thing. Because what I like about it is if I'm, not quite the person that James was describing before with my 2014 fighter, but I'm somebody who wants to try the new system, but I don't want to have to learn Call of Cthulhu or 13th Age or something completely different. This all still makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I can still look at that and be like, oh, okay, that is cool. I can get excited about this because it is a refresh. It's just the confusing, I don't even know if it's marketing or branding, but the confusing messaging about like, yeah, it can be used with this, but also not really, but kind of, but...
Also just the fatigue. This is a lot of paying attention to what's going on behind the scenes for something that is ultimately not even a new addition. Also, Jabberlucky in chat says, are we dancing around the capitalism of it all? No, we've just talked about that plenty of times in the past. Yeah. I think we've just said everything that we need to say about that, which is basically, of course, this is, it's not escaped our notice that it is an anniversary year for D&D that they're really, it's like, come on.
Mm-hmm. Jabberlucky also asks, is an honest refresh or just a crash grab? I'm legitimately curious. And I think the intent of it is a legitimate refresh, right? When it comes to the D&D creative team, I believe in them 100%. I believe they love the game and they want the game to be the best it can be. But I think the capitalism of it all often complicates that rather pure desire, right? Because I suspect if there were no issues of branding and marketability, I think calling this edition 5.5 would be a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. It's a mild update to a system everyone knows. But I don't know if they have market data back from 3.5 or whatever, or if a marketing team has made a decision. We're not going to call it 5.5 because that will divide the player base. They're going to divide the player base anyway, but they can minimize that a little bit by not advertising that they're about to divide the player base. There's a strong intent from brand and marketing to keep it all under one big tent. And that's going to cause some issues. But will it cause more issues than causing a marketing schism?
I think it's
none of us can know that.
Yeah, I think it's also because they're trying to they haven't slowed their production of content down. If anything, it's been ramping up. Why would I purchase Keys from the Golden Vault or Bigby's Talking About Giants, whatever that book is called, if
Bigby's Talking About Giants?
if like next year I know there's a new edition coming, right? So hey, don't worry. These books are still going to be compatible with, so get your Bigby's, start that adventure, and next year if you want to change to the new classes, you can, or buy it now, or when that refresh comes, they can still continue to sell, Bigby's Giants, Curse of Strahd, Tomb of Annihilation, as much as those books are still in print. I'm not sure how far back they're still printing, but
I think that the adventures question is actually the strongest case for backwards compatibility here, because this refresh, yes, it makes obsolete the 2014 era core rule books and also kind of makes obsolete all of the mechanical supplements since then, like Mordenkainen's and Xanathar's. It's all kind of a mess now. But the adventures are still totally compatible. They may have some power balancing issues, but honestly, the variance of power from one group to another is already such within 5e that I don't think will really suffer all that much. What this really makes me think of is World of Warcraft. When a new World of Warcraft expansion comes out, there are often enormous under-the-hood mechanical changes to the way the classes function. But they don't call that a new edition. They call it a new expansion. But when you think of an expansion, you think of the new story, of the new zones, of the new all of that. You don't think about, unless you're like a mythic tier raider or whatever, if you're 90% of the player base, you don't think about the way that every class is now completely different, because they still have the class identity there. And that's what 90% of all players care about.
Content, not system.
Content, not system. And so I think that's kind of what they're hoping will happen. But like you said earlier, Dael, because Warcraft has that sort of veneer, the computerized interpretation of everything going under the hood, it's much harder to notice than here, where you really have to be actively thinking about everything your character can do always.
This is a fairly fair question from the one with the gun once more in chat, asking about the differentiation between 3rd edition and 3.5 and comparing it to 5th edition 2014 and 5th edition 2024. From what you've seen, how different was 3 from 3.5 compared to 2014 to 2024?
It's right along these similar lines to me almost. It's the same system, but it's presented and there are just enough details where it's going to be very, very hard to meld those two rule sets together. Could you still use the adventures? A bit. You'd have to change a few things here and there. But it was different enough. Spells changed levels, right? That to the point where it was just impossible to use those other books if you wanted to move forward.
To me, the thing I always think of in that sort of pseudo edition change is that there are some skills that vanished. I always giggle when I see the innuendo skill from 3.0, which they wisely removed in 3.5 because that's really stupid. But it was really funny. I'm going to make an innuendo check. I wonder how many people said that all the time.
All right, in the time that we have left, because I do want to quickly touch on the other points of news, so it's not a pure Wizards of the Coast podcast. One or two things that stood out from you from the playtest as being interesting. Dael Kingsmill.
Well, first of all, I have a new theory, which is that they're doing this on purpose to tire us out so that we'll stop struggling. That's my new theory.
Wait, Dael, I want to talk on this because someone else mentioned a very similar theory about my apartment complex. Because my landlord, who sucks, by the way.
Should you be airing this?
Mark doesn't watch this show.
This is like when Shawn admitted one of his friends beat an animal.
So my landlord, my neighbor just moved out. My landlord is renovating a lot of things about the apartment. Like, he has hired people to just massacre the trees out front, right? Like, boughs are falling. It looks totally different. And honestly, all of this excessive renovation is driving me and the other tenants bananas. And a friend of mine said, oh yeah, landlords do that all the time. It's to stress you out enough that you leave and then he can sell the property. And I was like, oh God. I don't think Wizards is actively trying to do that, but it kind of feels that way.
Look, it's actually a good question. Very quickly, in Australia, they don't give you that courtesy. They'll just sell the property out from under you and then wait for your lease to expire. But I did wonder that myself, is why has this playtest packet just come out with so many pages? This definitely feels like it could have been 2 playtest packets a month apart.
It totally could have. And why isn't the monk in there? It just feels...
and why isn't the monk in there? And I suspect maybe they're doing a bit more work on the monk given its kind of Asian influences. They've already talked about wanting to move away from it being explicitly sort of coded that way. So that's probably why it's not in this playtest packet, I would imagine. But are they we had a playtest packet come out this week at the same time as the Kobold Press released a monster playtest packet following the Wizards of the Coast playbook to the letter. I'm watching it happen. And it is exhausting, but did they feel the pressure that they had to get a bigger playtest packet out? Did they feel like, oh, everybody else is ramping up their plans, let's keep the conversation about us, let's put out a bigger playtest packet? Or
it'd be wild if they did, because they're the big dog.
I highly doubt
Wizards doesn't think that way.
Yeah, they're not aware of what other people. Well, they're aware of what other people are doing, but they don't change their plans. I think the problem is we are now on May 1st of 2023, and 2024, as we have mentioned, is the 50th anniversary of D&D. Boy, what a time to release nice big books that people who played one time in 1974 will remember and say, oh, it's been 50 years, I'm going to buy these books. They need to do that for reasons that we've talked about many times on this show. And in order to do that, they have to say that they've play tested all of this material that they promised. So we are going to see large packets we are going to see lots of content dumped in our laps. And the question that follows is, what is their turning radius in getting that feedback and making any changes to it in order to be ready to go to publication in 6 months? More than 6? Less than 6? How long does it take to get a book together? Art, edit, publish. Yeah.
Let's assume they're aiming for a holiday 2024 release. What, a print run, I think they probably need minimum 4 months turnaround, final files into the printer, like dead minimum 4 months. Let's give them 6. They've got to be done at the end of this year, basically.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're releasing earlier. I mean, just based on what I know from the 5e release, it wasn't like, here's all the books, here we go. It was kind of like DMG, and then, or I think it was the Player's Handbook first with the 2014 example. Here, they seem to be indicating that the DMG will be first, but that's just going off the previous video that they released. Q2 DMG, Q3 Player's Handbook, Q4 Monster Manual. Or do you think it's more likely that they just slam them all out, like, the box set, the collector's box set?
Well, I do think Shawn makes a really good point of, like, 50th anniversary box set special, buy it for your, whoever. Sure. Buy it for your dad who played when he was a kid, So, yeah, I think either of those is a viable strategy. I think holidays is a pretty good bet.
AlphaStream tells us they did say they'd release the 3 core books in series, not all at once.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll say, I'll only pick 2 things because I know we're running short on time.
Playtest.
The other thing I'll say of the many things that I had thoughts on is I think that finally I found what the straw is that's broke this camel's back, which is just that they did go ahead and make the sorcerer a prepared caster. And I think that's my thing that has determined that I probably won't play this version of the game.
Can I ask a quick question, because I didn't quite get that far, but I was very curious to know. They've also changed the Warlock to have lots of spell slots. I know they talked about that, and I'm assuming recharge and a long rest like everybody else's. Is the Warlock also now a prepared caster?
Everyone's a prepared caster. Everyone's a prepared
Spellcasting
caster.
Works the same across the board.
The weird thing for warlocks that is really worth bringing up, I have to scroll all the way down my document, is that depending on your patron, or is it depending on your patron, or is it depending on your... There's a choice you make at the start of being a warlock. It's Pact of the Blade, Pact of the Chain, Pact of the Tome, changes what your spellcasting modifier is. So... You like, for Pact of the Blade, you choose between Wisdom or Charisma. For Pact of the Chain, you choose between Intelligence or Charisma. Pact of the Tome, you choose between Intelligence or Wisdom.
Okay.
Which is a very interesting idea, which is why I feel like, imagine what they could do if they were actually building from the ground up.
Yeah. It also feels like they're folding a lot. I noticed this, I think, with... I can't remember now whether it was
Nuck 3 in chat is pointing out, quite rightly, I should have said, Warlock is a full-on half-caster now. But I will say they're like a half-caster who doesn't have half anything else. That's what they feel like.
Yeah, I noticed with Pact of the Blade, they seem to be folding in a lot of the Hexblade kind of into the I had another example, I can't remember what it is. But yeah, like Hexblade doesn't seem like a subclass that will necessarily appear, because the medium armor, the using your charisma modifier for attacks, that all seems to be baked into Pact of the Blade and the class in general now, from what I've seen.
Which, let's be fair, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, probably true.
I think I'm hung up most on weapon mastery. I keep turning it around in my head like a rendered 3D sphere. Like I'm trying to visualize a red apple in my brain, because it's like there's so much of this missing. It's like they've offloaded a class feature into the equipment section, and I have no idea where in the classes that class feature will show up, right? When will fighters get their weapon mastery? Will they get it at an earlier level than rogues will? Will rogues get it at all? Will paladins get it at all? When does it happen? How impactful are these things? Because they're kind of cool, but they also don't feel like they're fully finished baking yet. I don't like the way that they're currently also very passive. Okay, this is the thing I really think. I love this concept. I sold Kobold Press this concept, and they published it basically 5 years ago as beyond damage dice. I think even my version of the concept needed more time to bake. But it's just such a cool concept. I'm glad Wizards is running with it. The thing that sits at the heart of this concept for me, though, which I don't think this playtest has grasped, is that the perennial problem of martial characters is that they lack interesting options. Rather than, I'm going to hit it 3 times with my weapon, and that's my turn. Ideally, weapon maneuvers should, in the same way that spellcasting offers not necessarily an increase in raw power, but an increase in like interesting turns.
Yeah.
Weapon mastery should give you more cool stuff to do that's relatively even in power with hit.
Yeah.
But all of these weapon mastery things, with a couple of exceptions, are extremely passive. They just kind of happen automatically when you hit with a weapon if you have the weapon mastery feature. And that means it's neat, but it doesn't actually solve the problem I think needs addressing.
Yeah.
So,
I agree.
This
They're
feature
not
is so
quite
cool.
cantrips.
Yeah, this feature is so cool, but it's like, I don't have faith that it will be revised enough to be to my satisfaction on this pell-mell timeline that we've just talked about for publication.
And there's going to be a lot less cliffs, ledges, and lava pools in dungeons, let me tell you, because it is much easier to push a thing into it.
It's very clear that the developers are very smart. They have come up with some very interesting systems, and they have found things that are actually problematic in 5e and have taken steps to fix them. And I'm thinking of the Barbarian's Rage and how one of the ways that you could keep your rage going was to take damage. And so therefore, speaking of problematic players at the table, people were saying, well, I stabbed myself in the thigh so I can keep my rage going. And so they looked to fix that, to take that onus off the game master to have to say, I'm sorry, you can't do that. And then the player getting up, why can't I do that? This is D&D and I can do anything I want. And again, taking that problematic player and giving the game master ways to get around those problems. Okay, just use your bonus action. You can keep your rage going. Mwah, perfect. No, hinky stuff going on. So good job there. I want a game that goes quickly from narrative to action back to narrative. If you want to play a complicated class, you should have options to get really tactical and maneuver and plan. But if you want to just hit something 3 times and feel good and feel strong doing that, you should have that option. And for me, the fighter was that class. If I was teaching someone how to play D&D who was really interested but didn't want to get into the tactics, I would say, here's a fighter. You can hit things 3 times, so do that. And they were happy doing that. And it quickly went from, it's your turn, 3 rolls, 3 hits. Oh, the monster's bleeding heavily thanks to your attacks. Next. By doing this, we're taking that option away from game masters and players as a tool to make the game something that a lot of people want it to be, which is quick and fun and narrative.
The new way the Barbarian Rage can be used
Yeah.
for both stealth checks and perception checks. I'm like, come on. If you wanted to stealth, pick a rogue. Like, I don't like this. I understand the Barbarian needed more things it could do outside of battle, so you didn't feel like you were just sitting on your hands for social encounters and such. But that just feels incongruous, having the Barbarian seethingly sneak around.
It's also, it's kind of a wording issue, right? Because I think it starts from the place of that thing that every Barbarian has wanted to do, where it's like, I'm going to intimidate them, and it turns out that your Barbarian has low charisma, so it doesn't work. So using strength, totally.
Great, makes sense.
But I don't know that this needs to be like a Barbarian feature. And so it just becomes weird. And the wording of it, I think, is what makes it a little awkward, because it's whenever you make an ability check using one of the following skills, you can make it as a strength check, even if it normally uses a different ability, which means that you are literally using your strength for it. And so that it incorporates acrobatics, that makes sense. Intimidation, that makes sense. Perception, stealth, survival, really, question mark. And then when you
right.
use this ability, your strength represents primal power coursing through and around you. That's like a band-aid on this.
Exactly. Really, all you have to say is, if you make these checks while you're raging, you have advantage, right? Take strength right out of it. Advantage works out to roughly what? +4, +5. Your strength is generally going to be, as a barbarian, +4, +5. It's literally the same math almost. And you don't have to add the strength to it. Just say you have advantage because you're super focused as you rage, or your primal instincts kick in as you rage. You don't need to bring strength into it at all.
It also feels a little bit
it.
like a symptom of not having enough strength-based skills in the game, because it's a cool idea being like, barbarians get all these bonuses to all of their strength checks, which are athletics.
Yeah. The chat's pointing out, and I was going to make this same point as well, that like technically this already exists in the game, where like you can make a strength intimidation check and you match the ability score with the
I do that
skill.
all the time. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
I find it's generally not super worth doing, because if I'm a rogue and I'm sneaking through a crowd of people and I'm like, all right, make a charisma stealth check to like get your way through the crowd, it's almost more of a penalty than it is a bonus, because the charisma for a rogue generally might be lower, or it's probably true of a barbarian as well if they don't have particularly high dexterity or whatever.
Also, I love it. I love it as a thing. I wish it was a core rule, but also it does often confuse people. If I say make a charisma sleight of hand check, they suddenly have no idea what to do.
No, exactly. But this is the interesting thing: is technically now. Sorry, Joe, you're muted. I'm going to keep going. I want to finish my point, but then I'll throw to you. Technically, it is a core rule now because of this barbarian ability, because if you have proficiency in intimidation, then you are using strength and your intimidation proficiency to get the bonus modifier, which complicates the game up a little bit for some folks who don't use that optional rule just to avoid the slight mental acrobatics you have to do to make it work. Sorry, James, go ahead.
No, I want to talk about why this particular variant rule, which is much beloved by people who like 5e IMO, is never ever used, why it's so confusing. And I think it's the fault of the character sheet. The character sheet for 5e does what 3rd edition and 4th edition character sheets does, is which it has you add two numbers together to produce a third number that you can read on the fly in 90% of situations. And then it means you kind of have to undo your math on the fly in order to do that, and that sucks. I think if the character sheet just had, list of skills and a little dot for proficiency, and you kind of had to do the math every time, it might suck more 90% of the time. Just a little bit.
Which is probably
why this...
That's the paradoxical thing of D&D, right? Wizards of the Coast, I love everybody at Wizards of the Coast. I really, really do. And they're like, we don't want people to have to add 3 and 2 together on the fly. But it's okay to give all of these complicated, convoluted skills where you have to, I can sap with this weapon. So you could have to spend 4 minutes figuring out your exact attack parameters, but you can't add 3 and 2 together on the fly because that's too much math. It's just, it's bizarre.
And
but subtraction is a core rule that you can't get rid of.
You mean reverse math?
Yeah, reverse
Let me tell you,
maths.
I have someone who has number dyslexia in my D&D group. Incredibly smart person. They're an incredibly smart person. They're a climate scientist. They're fantastic, but they do have number dyslexia. And what that means is they just have their partner look over and say, that's the number.
Sure.
Right, like the simplifying down the bonuses actually does not aid them in any way, because the problem is adding the bonus to the die. Like, it could be 1 step, it could be 5. It would make no difference for them because it's still a roadblock. So I actually think that this intent to simplify, streamline the math is less useful than it may seem.
I'm going to be honest. I don't like the rhetoric. I get why it exists, and I totally get that it's an important thing. but I think it's becoming a rhetoric similar to like don't prep too much for DMs being like this thing that DMs hit themselves over the head with and think like, oh, am I prepping too much? Am I creating not enough options for my players? Like, am I doing the wrong thing? Am I a bad DM? Blah, blah, blah. Is this idea that the game needs to be as fast as possible. Make it as quick as possible. Like, go through as quick as you can. If you take more than 5 minutes on your turn, well, 5 minutes is a long time, but like if you take more than 15 seconds on your turn, you're holding up the game and stopping everybody else from being able to play. And like, you might decide what you're going to do on your turn ahead of time. And so it's like, okay, I've decided, I know what I'm going to do, so I'm not going to hold up the game. Oh, something else has changed the battlefield in the turn before mine. That monster just got killed. Oh, okay, well, now I do have to rethink what I'm going to do on my turn. It's fine to make a decision. And the reason I bring this up is speaking of playtest packets, somebody asked me this on Twitter, the Kobold Press playtest packet on monsters. I think there's a lot of interesting things in there, but the thing I absolutely hate is standardized monster damage. Is just like there's no rolling dice for monster damage anymore. It's just the monster does this much damage. And I hate it gutturally. The reason they give in the playtest packet seems to be it'll speed up combat. The DM doesn't have to roll and add numbers together. The DM's a player. The DM wants to roll dice and add numbers together. The DM wants to be like, yeah, take it, player. I think, and the annoying thing is the way that they've changed it is it doesn't indicate to you what dice you should be rolling if you wanted to roll dice. There's a chart in a separate section of the playtest packet that you then have to scroll to figure out the size of your monster and how much damage it's doing and anyway.
I'm glad you have such strong feelings about it because I have no strong feelings about the playtest packet. I looked at it, I was like, this seems like pretty much 5e monsters, but slightly better.
I do
Which is Kobold Press's trademark.
A little improvement over 5e monsters. I want to talk about the standardized damage because I'm very interested by it. Here's what I think. I think it's a weak ass half measure.
Wow.
Throw down the glove.
Respectfully, I want them to do one of two things. I want them to go back to what 5e does because I think, to Ben's point, 5e does that pretty well. Or I want them to also standardize to hit rolls. And have
so the monster hits you or doesn't hit you.
Yes.
But then it becomes impossible for the monster to, like, if you have a field of goblins, right, they'll never be able to hit the paladin ever because if they've got standardized to hit, they'll never roll higher than a certain armor class.
Yes.
That's why you need your goblin shaman.
I want them, if they're going to do something like that, I want them to go all the way and make a damn new system out of it.
Sure.
Because if that is in play, if we're standardizing numerical values for monsters, let's take that to the end of the line and see what we can do with it. Because I think there's something interesting there, but it doesn't look very much like 5e anymore.
Yeah.
But okay, ultimately, my final word on this is just that I think they're doing what Wizards does, and they're doing something outrageous, and it's going to make people mad, and they're going to backtrack. This is not going to survive this playtest packet. Basically.
Mission accomplished, because it made this guy mad.
To be fair, I do agree, Ben. I a couple times have been like, man, I've got so many bad guys that I got to keep track of in this combat. Maybe I should just standardize damage. And every single time I go, nah, I want to roll. I like the noise behind the screen for the players. Yeah. I like picking up my clicky clackies.
I wish I'd had the chance to run Blades in the Dark for you and the folks at the office while I was there in Ospen, because Blades in the Dark, the GM doesn't roll anything. And that is a very divisive bit of game design. Some people, I think Numenera does this also, Monte Cook's Numenera game, the DM doesn't roll much of anything. And for people who think, yeah, the GM is a player too, and so much of the fun of playing is rolling dice, those systems do not appeal to them, to GM very much. So they just don't run that game.
Well, what's interesting...
it was really cool to run Blades in the Dark like that, because it made me feel like a different kind of player.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're more of like, does it make you feel more like a facilitator than like you're just like watching the story unfold and telling the players how things interact with...
Which I'm sure lots of GMs love that feeling, right? Lots of GMs love to be that person, but...
Blades is a very player-driven game. Players have a tremendous amount, almost an overwhelming amount of agency in Blades. The GM is very reactive and is kind of spinning off of what the players give them, which makes sense for that system. And so the mechanics support the intent, the intent of play. Yeah, so totally different stuff.
Info bro in the chat saying they use static damage, but are 100% online now, so don't get the visceral thrill of rolling the dice. I kind of like how 5e already had it, where you had the standard damage there in the stat block, but if you wanted to roll, you could roll. So it kind of gave you both options there in the stat block. I thought it was written fairly elegantly, whereas the way Kobold Press have done it, you've got to scroll to a chart, so it's kind of hard to do it both ways. But what's interesting is that they have standardized also the stealth of the monster and don't really give you the math behind how that stealth is worked out. They're sort of like, kind of the size and their dexterity score kind of come up with this like standardized stealth score that they don't roll stealth anymore. The players just roll perception checks to see if they can spot the monster. Which I'm annoyed that I don't know what the math is, because as a GM, I want to be able to come up with my own monsters and come up with my own stealth scores based on the math that the game is already using, rather than just randomly make up a stealth score. But funnily enough, I do use standardized stealth scores in my game. If I have a monster that has a +8 to stealth, usually I'll just use its passive 18 for the players to roll against, rather than roll a dice behind the screen, risk rolling too low for one, and for two, give away to the players that something's going on because I've rolled a dice. So it's fairly contextual in terms of when I like to roll dice as a GM. So it's interesting that maybe it's a contradiction. I don't know. Anyway. Paizo announced Pathfinder are doing a new core thing as well. They want to get the OGL out of their game, so they're doing the player core, the GM core, the player core 2, and the monster core. And that's been this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever good podcasts are found. Give it a like, 5 stars, all that stuff. It really does help the podcast get out to more folks. If you've been watching us here on Twitch, we are on live 7 p.m. Monday nights, Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Monday afternoon, Pacific Standard Time, or 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for the Australians that are in the chat. Luna, I see you. And we will catch you next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Ba-da-da-ba-da-da-ba.
Da-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.
The boom.
So tired.